Halloween, 1983 in Fairfield, Illinois. 13-year-old friends Andrew, Heath, Shane, and Eric were out trick-or-treating when a boy came up to them, asking if he could join them, to which they agreed. What happened that evening was not only gruesome but disturbing. Years later, Eric told his side of the story of what happened that night. Halloween used to be my favorite holiday, until that night. I woke up earlier than usual that morning so my mom could make me into Dracula before school. She was always good at making me look scary, and this time was no different. It was always fun seeing what my friends and classmates dressed up as. When I made it to school, we took turns going up in front of the class to show everyone what we were. The other kids were always impressed with mine, which made me proud. Before school let out, me and my friends agreed to meet up at 5 p.m. in the church parking lot that was just down the street from my house. Then we make our way through the neighborhoods, trying to get as much candy as we could. When I got home, I ate the dinner my mom prepared and watched some afternoon cartoons, as I anxiously awaited for 5 p.m. to roll around. After what seemed like forever, the clock finally hit 4:55. As I grabbed my pillowcase I was hoping to fill up with candy, gave my mom a hug, then bolted out the door. As I ran down the street, I could see Heath and Shane were already there, and knew Andrew would be a few minutes late, as he always was. When I got close, I could hear them talking excitedly about how much candy they'd hoped to get, as I quickly joined the conversation. Not long after, Andrew walked up behind us, jump scaring us as he did. We then debated for a bit on where we should start. We finally decided to start at the end of one of the far neighborhoods and make our way through each one so we wouldn't miss a house. There were also some houses outside the neighborhoods we wanted to hit also. We planned on being out as late as possible or until we filled up our pillowcases. We were full of excitement as we watched the streets fill up with other kids who were just excited as we were. When we finally made it to the house we wanted to start at, we didn't waste any time walking up, ringing their doorbell, and singing the Halloween jingle we always sang. I always liked watching the candy drop into my bag as I grinned. We continued going from house to house as we talked and laughed, and had made it down several streets as darkness started closing in, when we heard a young boy behind us say, "Can I join you guys? I think I'm lost." It startled us as we turned around looking at him. He was wearing an old man mask and was short. He was also holding what looked like a really old metal pail. Based on his height and small frame, he had to be 4 to 5 years younger than us. I looked at my friends, wondering what they were thinking, when Andrew spoke up, saying, "Sure, kid, you can follow us until you find your home." "I don't know, man. He's an outsider, and we have no idea who he is. We don't need the baggage," whispered Shane in a low tone. "It's all right. Just keep up, kid," said Heath loud enough for the boy to hear. The rest of us nodded our heads in agreement, then turned back around and continued walking. Before turning around, though, I stood there looking at him as he stared intently at me through his mask. The thought, "This kid is a little odd," went through my mind. I quickly dismissed it, as the thought of filling up my pillowcase with candy was more important. As we went from house to house, the kid stayed a few feet behind us, but would come up to each house, hold out his metal pail, and say nothing. He'd just glare at the people handing out the candy, then continue following us. After a few houses, we whispered amongst ourselves at how strange the kid was, but laughed it off. Every class in school had a strange kid. It was nothing new. We'd been going for probably an hour when the boy walked up into the middle of us and asked, "How can I find my way home?" "I don't know, kid. Do you have any idea at all where you live?" asked Heath, somewhat agitated. "No," was all he replied. "Well, then you'll just have to follow us until we're done, then talk to our parents, and they can figure it out," responded Heath. The boy said nothing, just went back to following us as we continued going from house to house. After a while, one thing I noticed was the boy's pail was full and would not hold any more candy. He'd still walk up to the house with us and look at the people when they opened the door. A few hours later, we'd finished all the neighborhoods, and our plan was to hit several houses that were away from everyone, then we'd head home. We didn't know any of the people who lived in those outlier homes and hoped they gave out good candy, because the furthest one away was about a mile. The first two outlier houses we hit were jackpots, being it was late and they had a lot of leftover candy they gave us. This pushed us to continue on to the furthest one, which would be our last. The excitement had worn down though, and we were getting tired of walking so much. As we got closer to the house, I could see the moonlight shining off the lake that was next to it. The house was old and had been there for as long as I could remember. I think the people living there had only been there for about a year. Other than that, I didn't know much about them. We could see their front porch light on, which was a good sign. When we made it to their yard, I noticed the boy hesitated before stepping onto the grass. "Don't worry, kid. Come on," I said to him as I continued walking towards their porch. My friends were already at the front door when I made it. I looked over my shoulder and could see the boy was slowly approaching. A few minutes went by before the door opened. We said our thing as a nice, normal looking lady answered the door and said, "Trick or treat," back to us with a smile. I could see two younger children sitting at a table in the background, still dressed in their costumes. Right then, the boy walked in between us until he was standing in front, just a foot away from the lady. He slowly took off his mask and said, "Hello, Mommy. I finally found you." His face looked soulless, is the best way I can describe it. Other than that, he looked like a normal kid. The ceramic bowl of candy she was holding hit the floor, breaking into 100 pieces, as she got the most horrified look on a person's face I'd ever seen. "How did you find us?" she said in a terrified tone as she started backing up. The boy said nothing as he slowly stepped into the house, heading towards the lady. "Jim, he found us," she screamed as she turned to run. I was stunned as I watched the boy suddenly pounce on the lady with lightning speed, taking her to the ground. She shrieked out in pain as he began tearing at her neck, as a pool of blood began to form on the hardwood floor. The children screamed as they took off running. The husband then came into view as he turned the corner shouting, "What in God's name is going on?" I think it took a few seconds for him to process what was happening before he yelled, "No, it can't be." He then grabbed the boy and threw him across the room, hitting the wall. The boy calmly got up, gained his composure, and stood there looking at the man. "How did you find us?" asked the man. "It doesn't matter, Daddy. I found you," he replied. Then again with lightning speed, he pounced on the man, taking him to the ground, and began tearing at his neck as the man tried fighting back, but it was no use. We stood there in shock, unable to move, before Andrew shouted, "Come on, let's get the hell out of here now." I think it was Heath who grabbed my arm as I dropped my pillowcase and turned to run. Now I don't know why. I think I was so scared and didn't have time to think, just react. But for some reason, I ran around the side of the house, heading into the trees as my friends took off running down the road. I wasn't thinking as I ran. I just knew I needed to get as far away from the house as possible. I fell down several times as I tried navigating my way through the thick trees when suddenly I was falling, then hit freezing water and realized I was in the lake. When I came to the surface, I quickly turned around to see if the boy was behind me. I breathed a sigh of relief as I treaded water because from what I could see, he was not there. I was a good swimmer, so I turned around and began swimming in the opposite direction, hoping to make it to the other side. I swam as fast as I could, which was not easy in my shoes and costume, and the fact the water was freezing. I had to stop and take a lot of breaks. About halfway across, I really started getting tired and knew I needed a long break or I'd drown. I decided to float on my back for a while. As I laid there floating, with my head half submerged, I faintly heard the loud splash of something jumping into the water. I immediately moved, turning around as I treaded water to see what it was. Even with it being dark, I could see enough that something was coming towards me, fast. I quickly turned and began swimming harder and faster than I ever had in my life. I just kept my focus on the shore as I swam. When I finally reached the shore, I stumbled out of the water, turning to look behind me as I tried catching my breath. Whatever it was still swiftly coming at me. I wasted no time in trying to clamber up the steep bank, which was difficult as the dirt was soft. Panic shot through me as I kept sliding down once I thought I'd made it. I looked over my shoulder and it was almost at the shore. I gave it one more try, giving it all I had, yelling as loud as I could when I finally reached the top. I then stumbled through the trees, never stopping and constantly looking over my shoulder. I went for a long time before my legs finally gave out on me and I fell down. I laid there all night, scared out of my mind, almost freezing to death until morning came. When the sun rose and warmed me up enough, I made my way through the forest for what seemed like hours until I finally came to a farmhouse. The family living there called the sheriff and my parents, who then came and picked me up. Come to find out, they'd been searching all night for me. My friends and I were questioned that day, and nothing ever came of it. When Andrew, Heath, and Shane got away, they stopped at the first house they came to and called the sheriff's department. Deputies arrived at an utterly gruesome scene at the outlier house. Both the parents and two children aged 8 and 10 were found dead. Their throats had been ripped out. In the house, they found family pictures that were taken at least 5 years before, based on the ages of the two dead children. In the picture were 3 children. Eric and his friends identified the oldest child in the picture as the boy who'd followed them to the house that night. No trace of the boy was ever found, except for his footprints in the mud along the bank where he chased Eric in and out of the lake. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.